Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders, Simon Dixon here, and welcome to a new kind of show that we're experimenting with. Today, we're doing Bitcoin Hard Talk Interviews. It's going to be 30 minutes where I invite a guest, and this was very spontaneous. I was on a couple of X Spaces with Dennis Porter, and Dennis has been doing amazing work on the Bitcoin lobby group. Now, you all know that I'm very critical of lobby groups and the role of money within shaping US politics and how that moves around the system. But Bitcoin has now become a part of the political sphere, and it is accelerated 1,000 times in the last few months and weeks. And part of that is due to the work that Dennis has been doing in the background. So I wanted to bring in Dennis right now. And we're going to start with Dennis. Why don't you just give a brief introduction to yourself, the Bitcoin lobby and the work that you've been doing and kind of how you got involved in it?
Absolutely, Simon. And thank you again for having me on the show. Very excited to be able to be the first guest for Hard Talk here and talk a little bit about my two favorite subjects, Bitcoin and politics. For those that don't know me, my name is Dennis Porter. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Satoshi Action Fund, which is a Bitcoin advocacy group that originally was on a mission to make the United States to be the best place in the world for Bitcoin. But after talking to enough international partners, we realized that the US is in fact now the best place to be a Bitcoiner, have a Bitcoin company. And so we have now changed our mission, and our new mission now, after accomplishing our first mission in just a little over 2 years, is to unlock the true potential of Bitcoin, which is why we're very excited about this idea of having a Bitcoin strategic reserve. These are the types of ideas that are going to ultimately unlock the potential of Bitcoin. And so we're very excited to not only be a part of that dialogue, but actually crafting some of the ideas on how this could be implemented. There's a number of ways we can get into that. A little bit more on our track record, which I think is important when you're talking about crafting public policy, especially at the federal level. We at Satoshi Action Fund, when we launched in June of 2022, we immediately got to work developing public policy for Bitcoin. We crafted a number of different pieces of legislation. Our most important piece of legislation, which is our Bitcoin rights bills, that started off as a right to mine, which is a term that we coined, and also a term that was inevitably adopted by the Republican Party platform, as well as the right to self-custody. Those are all part of our Bitcoin rights bills now that we push, and we have successfully introduced that piece of legislation in over 20 states. Ultimately, 4 states have already passed that legislation into law: Arkansas, Oklahoma, Montana, and Louisiana. And in Louisiana, we also passed a ban on central bank digital currencies. Beyond that, we do academic research. We've developed cutting edge research. We generate more Bitcoin research than anyone in the space. And it's not just research that goes on a website. It is research that is getting into academic journals to really change that narrative on Bitcoin and people to see that true potential of Bitcoin. So there's a lot more going on. I'm happy to get into it, but wanted to just give people an overlay of where we're at and where we're going to be going with the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve. Looking forward to the conversation with you, Simon.
Awesome. Okay, we got a slight lag, so sorry if it's a bad experience. First time we've done the interview, we'll get the technology better as we progress. So if there's a slight slowdown in the conversation, it's just because of the technology. But the question I had for you is, next week is Bitcoin 2024. I did my first annual Bitcoin conference in 2011. I spoke at 2011, 2013, and the other day I published some photos from Bitcoin 2014, 2015, and 2016 as well. I kind of retired from the annual conferences when we're doing a lot more online, but they have gone to the next level. Now, obviously, the most famous one, I can't remember whether it was 19 or 20, was when President Bukele announced that he's making Bitcoin legal tender. He delivered upon that promise. And then the next year, we had a bunch of sovereign countries, and it was a little bit flaky. They were saying, we're going to allow people to pay tax, or we're going to support this industry, or we'll start mining it, from smaller nation states. And then it kind of turned around a bit more, and we had RFK coming out saying that he wants to support Bitcoin. And this year, the big announcement was that Donald Trump is going to be making it a big part of his campaign financing. And that has led to a wave of speculation around what he's actually going to be announcing. So we heard from different sources that there may be an announcement of going straight for the jugular, the big thing. Now, we know that he's not actually the president and there's still a presidential election, but unless he gets actually assassinated, which I'm praying does not happen, then it looks like he's going to be the next president of the United States. And he's making a lot of promises to us. The biggest promise is whether the US would add Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And I've spoken to a few of my sources. There's lots of rumors there. And then also you made a tweet out there. So let me know what you know and what do you think is going to be announced next week by President Trump at Bitcoin 2024?
Absolutely. And let's start back just to, the ability for the Bitcoin conference to be able to put together these incredible speakers. They have done a fantastic job. I mean, I remember when I was there at the Bitcoin conference when Bukele announced that El Salvador would be making Bitcoin legal tender. It was an exciting moment. I think it was one full of surprise and sort of shock and awe. As someone whose parents has lived in El Salvador for roughly 15 years, it was an exciting moment for me and my family, who has been there since before Bitcoin really even existed, to be able to see that country be able to adopt the technology. Moving forward, there's continued to be great speakers, but I don't think there's been one quite as high profile as the one that's going to be coming for this conference. And also the potential announcement that he would be making as well. I had heard from a lot of different sources, including some people that are highly, highly credible in the space. And also, even after I announced it, I received additional confirmation from even more credible sources that this was the plan for Trump to come in and for Trump to announce that he was going to be making a Bitcoin strategic reserve with the United States government. In my opinion, I personally think that a couple of smart moves here. You can do a variety of different ways that the government could buy Bitcoin, because people keep telling me, why would you announce this before you've acquired your position? But this is where smart policy work comes into play. For one, the obvious is that we should end the auction on the U.S. Marshals who are currently auctioning off all the confiscated Bitcoin into the open market. It's $5.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. We should absolutely end those auctions and convert what is currently in the custody of the U.S. Marshals into the U.S. Treasury. Right away, $5.5 billion gets added of Bitcoin, gets added to our Treasury, gets added to some sort of vehicle that could be an exchange stabilization fund. It could be a number of different approaches. I did talk a little bit about exchange stabilization funds on my Twitter. I think that is one of the more obvious ways that you can approach this. But we at Satoshi Action are also currently looking at how we can help craft ideas for a different approach to this as well. So we're actively working on that, and we're really excited about moving forward with this idea. For those that don't know, I've been fighting for states and for governments to adopt Bitcoin, not only as a potentially a legal tender, but also as something to add onto their balance sheet. Additionally, I think most importantly, in order to truly unlock the potential of Bitcoin, we need to end capital gains on Bitcoin as a technology. Certainly it goes up in value, but I don't understand how I'm supposed to pay for groceries as someone who uses Bitcoin, who holds Bitcoin. How do I pay for groceries? How do I pay for gas? How do I pay for coffee without incurring a major taxable event? And so at bare minimum, we need to start that fight and start with the de minimis exemption. At Satoshi Action, our model policy actually incorporates a de minimis exemption into our model. And so in 2025, we will be actively fighting to ensure that the states lead on that issue, and hopefully that the federal government inevitably adopts some sort of de minimis exemption on Bitcoin capital gains.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's have a quick talk about mining, because I think this is where, obviously, right in the beginning of the Bitcoin industry, I think around about 2013, it started to shape this geopolitical kind of chimerica type of relationship, where we had a lot of the mining innovation, a lot of the ASICs manufacturing, a lot of the hash power, a lot of the mining pools was an industry that first grew in China. And once it became like something in China, a lot of people left. Like there was early developers like Mike Hearn that he left the project when it was like $250 and said he's selling all his Bitcoin because he thought it was too centralized within China and China was going to take over the whole project. Now it didn't quite play out that way, because at certain moments there was one mining pool like Ghash that got over almost got to 50% of the hash power in their pool. And then it really just moved over to other mining pools, and we started to see how anti-fragile Bitcoin is and how it adjusted. But it wasn't until 2021, when China was flip-flopping back and forth. America was always having most of the startups, most of the large companies. You had many of the exchanges that were the largest ones in both China and America. But China started to get a bit more aggressive on banning exchanges. And then in 2021, energy. And we started to get all of these public companies listed on NASDAQ within America. And then it started to look like there was going to be a strategic move from America. And I think this was vocalized by Trump, which is a bit of a quote that is slightly mocked, but he wants all the Bitcoins to be mined in America. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen, but it's a sentiment that seems to spark off. And now I think that's going to lead to some more game theory, where China's going to probably remove the ban on Bitcoin mining. So tell me, what's the importance of Bitcoin mining? How is it good for America? What's happening with all the, the FUD talk around, all the electricity, and that it's a waste of electricity? Just dig into what's happening with mining in America, and how some of the lobby efforts that you've been doing is playing into that.
Absolutely. With regards to Bitcoin using too much energy or wasting energy, the more interesting component of Bitcoin is, in fact, that it is using wasted energy. We see more often than not that Bitcoin miners are participating in grid balancing programs. Oftentimes those terms are demand response. They're a part of a bucket of what are called ancillary services. These are super critical services to the grid in order to ensure that it stays balanced, especially as we move through the energy transition. In order for the grid to ensure that it can provide electricity to customers, it has to stay perfectly balanced between supply and demand at all times. If it doesn't, the grid can collapse. And so we saw this happen in Texas in 2021. Winter Storm Uri came through, absolutely demolished the grid. They weren't ready. And ultimately, 700 people died because of that event. Well, fast forward through 2022, and keep in mind that ban of Bitcoin mining in China that took place that you mentioned, and we see Bitcoin miners flood into the state of Texas and plug into the grid and start to participate in these ancillary service programs which balance the grid. Soon after, there was another huge Winter Storm Elliott. Almost identical scenario took place. And what happened was the Bitcoin miners had signed up for a number of different grid balancing programs. And during that winter storm, they wound down and delivered 1.7 gigawatts of energy back to the grid to ensure that ratepayers, hospitals, schools were able to keep the lights on, and importantly, the heat on during that winter storm. And to put in context, for people that don't understand the size of energy or the context of how much energy that is, 1.7 gigawatts is enough energy to heat 1.7 million small homes, or to energize over 300 large hospitals. It is a massive amount of power. And there is simply no other industry on planet Earth who can deliver that amount of energy in that unique type of a moment, and honestly do it as long as they need. Some people can shut down for an hour here or there. They can wind down 50% or 60%, some industries, but no one can wind down 100% of the way within hours. And then also, if the grid needs, ramp back up within seconds. So it's an incredible it's an incredible feature that Bitcoin mining has that no one else really has. And we're fortunate and lucky to be able to have it here in the United States, really because China ended up banning Bitcoin mining. And so it's really, really important that people understand that value, because that value to balance the grid doesn't just apply to some sort of an energy reserve. It also ensures that we're able to overcome some of the obstacles that renewable energy has placed on the grid as well. Renewable energy like wind and solar is a very great energy asset, and we want to be able to utilize this carbon-free energy. Unfortunately, there is a holdback, or there is a downside of renewable energy, and that is that when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining is not always when people need energy. It's not an on-demand power energy generator. So what happens with all that excess energy? Well, it goes to waste. And what happens on the long term of that is those renewable energy projects are much less profitable and much more dependent on government subsidies for the long term. So instead of having to waste all of that excess energy and depend on public funding, Bitcoin miners can come in and utilize all of the excess wind and solar that is generated, ensuring that those wind and solar plants receive the ROI necessary to be able to continue being utilized. Additionally, beyond that, Bitcoin mining has this very unique ability to be able to operate anywhere in the world. Predominantly, it gets focused in on areas where there is stranded and wasted energy. And just by chance, those areas tend to be rural or under economically developed areas of the country. So what happens is when these Bitcoin miners go in to utilize energy in rural parts of the country, we see jobs being delivered to some of the most left behind and forgotten parts of this country. They call it flyover country, but at the end of the day, there are Americans and there are humans that are in the middle of this country that are suffering from the gutting out of our manufacturing, that are suffering from all of the jobs being pushed out to the borders, out to the cities that are on the water, out to the left and to the right coast, and not into the middle of the country. And so Bitcoin mining now provides an avenue for us to truly deliver jobs to the middle of the country and to those people who have been left behind and haven't had an opportunity to be able to participate in this economy that we've been growing over the last 20, 30 years. We finally have tech jobs for the middle of the country, and it's only really Bitcoin mining as a technology that has been able to offer that as a feature.
Yeah, I can see why you went into the political sphere. You really know how to tell a story that is absolutely true and reframe it in the eyes of what politicians should care about. And that's one of the really interesting stages where we are as an industry. Obviously, we were originally, an us versus bank movement, and governments and banks and financial institutions have had to capitulate over time, and they've started to realize the benefit. And one of the real things that would make me have more faith in terms of the debt that the US economy is currently running is if it did have a Bitcoin reserve asset and it did hedge against itself. And maybe that leads to some really interesting dynamics and the opposite and the antithesis of what we've seen with the German government and potentially the UK government, which we've just found out has another 5 billion as well on there as well. So it's going to be really interesting to watch it. One question I had is the first time I remember the US government getting involved in our industry was when there was a documentary around how Bitcoin was being used on Silk Road, and how FinCEN wanted to introduce new regulations to try and get some of the criminal part out of it and help people understand the early case of what Bitcoin was being used for. And over time, we've been through, over the last 4 years in the last cycle, a real regulatory and government, what feels like real aggression. And so certain politicians who have made their thoughts known around all the negative side of our sector, of our industry, and very aggressively gone after, whether it be through SEC and regulations, whether it be through tax and treasury, whether it be through the CFTC, or whether it be through money transmitter regulations and various other things. I think most of us have built a belief that the Democratic Party have kind of been the ones that were responsible for some of the darkest times in our industry. And we seem to be ushering into a new wave of optimism, growth, innovation, because the Republican government seems to be saying and embracing all the right things, assuming Trump gets elected next. Is it really as partisan as it feels for us? Is the Republican the Bitcoin party and the Democrat party the anti-Bitcoin party, or is it really not quite like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Simon. This is something that we've been really focused on at Satoshi Action. We care very deeply about the entire country being able to participate in the Bitcoin future. I think it's important to note that there has been many technologies that have come along where initially when they were launched, they received a significant amount of pushback. Everything from electricity to the internet has received large amounts of criticism when the technology was launched. When the internet was born, it was for scammers, it was for criminals, and now we're doing live video calls from my laptop in my hotel to your studio, and it's an incredible technology that has been able to unlock true human potential. And now policymakers, they don't fight over whether we should use the internet or not. That would be a sort of a ludicrous approach to thinking about how the internet would be used. Getting rid of the internet would send us back to the Stone Ages. And now lawmakers instead fight over how we use the internet. There's certainly lengthy and important debates over how we create and implement internet policy here in America. Ultimately, we lead the world on some of the best internet policy, and I think it's why we are a leader on the technology. Transport over to Bitcoin, we are currently still in an era where there is an opposition to Bitcoin, and there's opposition to using Bitcoin or letting it be adopted. But I do believe that we as a country are going to transition out of half of the country being opposed to the technology to the entire country being for the technology, and then battling over how we implement Bitcoin as a technology. Just as a quick example on policy, it's very obvious to anyone that is paying attention that Democrats are going to want to see Bitcoin mining be used as a technology to advance renewable energy. And Republicans are just going to say, we don't care. We're all of the above. We want it to advance all energy. But that's the type of debates that we want to see in this country. We don't want half the country debating over whether or not we should Bitcoin. We want the entire country debating over how we Bitcoin. So certainly it's going to be an exciting time as we move forward. We're very much looking forward to how policy is going to be developed between the Republicans and the Democrats. And to your note of, is this becoming a partisan issue? I do not believe so. In fact, Trump's announcement and his boldness on this issue has actually led to more Democrats coming out of the woodwork, making sure that people know that they support this technology. Legislation has actually started moving through the Democrats in the Senate because of this effort by Trump, and they're starting to realize that this is an issue that they can no longer ignore. I don't think this is going to be a traditional battle line where because the Republicans are for it, the Democrats are going to be against it. I think what's happening right now is that because of Trump's position, more and more Democrats are going to be working overtime to ensure that their constituency and the other leaders within the Democrat Party are going to be supportive of this technology. And as a quick note, there's a study coming out soon where it'll back up the claim that Bitcoin is owned by a broad range of political ideologies. There's no sort of centralization of Bitcoin ownership on the right or on the left. I'm looking forward to that study, which will back up the idea that Bitcoin is truly nonpartisan. I think it'll be an important study to show that all Americans can be a part of this future. But certainly, yes, I think Republicans are leading on the technology right now, but it's not going to be long before Democrats come around.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely Bitcoin plays into all sorts of different narratives of why people would want it. We were originally a cypherpunk movement. We were us versus the banks. We were, self-custody, giving people a way to transact. We were a resistance movement against central banking. And over time, that appeals to very different people, and it morphs into many different things where people can use Bitcoin in the way that they want to do it, whether you are on the extreme left or the extreme right, whether it be a tool for, more wealth inequality, whether it be a tool for making governments less significant in your life, whether it's a tool for freedom and being able to own your own money, spend your own money, and protect yourself from the policy of central bankers and even some of the wars that can be waged. Bitcoin plays into many different things, whichever side of the politics or even geopolitics that you sit in. Which gives me to probably the final question now. Given where we came from, there are many people that are absolutely mortified by announcements like Jamie Dimon is now being told that he's pro-Bitcoin and he's going to be involved in roles with Treasury, and that governments are going to be using it as Treasury assets, and that lobby groups are happening. And maybe there's all these different banking lobbies that are fighting against it. How do you feel? Why should we as Bitcoiners that wanted to create something that would resist against the control of government on our freedoms, why should we care about politics? Why should we be politically engaged? And how should we feel that now some of the largest financial institutions are making markets in Bitcoin, looking to custody Bitcoin? And now we've got, some of the largest figures in our industry, whether it be the Winklevoss twins, that are saying, I'm sending $1 million of Bitcoin over to this party and I'm supporting this. How should we feel about that and where we are as an industry right now?
It's an important question. I absolutely agree with you. In fact, when I first got into Bitcoin in 2017, I had the same feeling, that we needed to make sure that Bitcoin was protected from the political system and that it was outside the political system. But at the end of the day, there's one thing that people need to keep in mind, and it is that Bitcoin might be outside the political system, but you and me and other Americans and people across the world are not outside that political system. We are still beholden to the laws and the regulations that those political systems create. And so if you want to see a world where your government is protecting Bitcoin, advancing Bitcoin, is buying Bitcoin and holding it as a strategic reserve, it's your duty to go and push for your values and to protect your values and to do what you need to do to win in order to ensure that your country is pro-Bitcoin and that it advances this technology. There's an old saying, goes back to Plato, and it says that if you abdicate your responsibility to participate in government, you are doomed to be ruled by your inferiors. I think that's such an important quote because oftentimes people believe, well, I don't like politics. I'm not about politics. But at the end of the day, you might not like politics. You might not want to participate in politics. You might not even be interested in politics. But politics is absolutely interested in you. And so we need to be standing up to protect our rights. It's why at Satoshi Action, we protect the right to self-custody. We protect the right to mine. We protect the right to run a node. And we protect the rights of peer-to-peer transactions because we know that it's important to enshrine those rights into law, just as the founders originally enshrined our rights into the Constitution. I often tell people, they say, oh, I don't like any of the stuff you're doing. I don't like bills being passed. I don't think we need to do any of this. I think it's all a waste of time. And then I look at them dead in the face and I say, do you think the US Constitution is a waste of time? Because that's ultimately what they're saying, that they don't believe that we need to protect our rights. It's something that I totally stand against. I think we need to ensure that we protect ourselves from the long arm of the government, from federal overreach. And it's something that we at Satoshi Action Fund are not only not going to stop doing, but we are going to continue now on mission number 2. Mission number 1, right? Are we going to be able to make the United States the best place in the world for Bitcoin? That mission has been accomplished. Mission number 2, how do we truly unlock the potential of Bitcoin? And the way that we do that is by being highly politically active. Now, if you don't want to be involved in the political space, I understand. Well, it's a great opportunity to go support those organizations like Satoshi Action who are willing to fight on behalf of you and willing to fight on behalf of Bitcoin.
Awesome. Okay, we're coming to the end of the interview. Really enjoyed it. And what I would really say as we come to the summary is that while it's not my area of enjoyment being involved in politics, but there's no doubt about it that if you want to beat them, you certainly have to join them at some stage and you have to play the game that works. And so those of you that want to be involved in shaping the future of politics in your country, well, let's have as many Dennis Porters around the world that are saying, we want our country to be the best for Bitcoin. Because one of the really good things about this is game theory is going to roll out. If Trump says, when President Bukele said that we're going to be the first to make it legal tender and we're going to create Bitcoin country and Bitcoin freedom, I think that set off a competitive edge with Trump. And if you heard his speech last night, there was a little bit of that competitive spirit where he was having a few digs at President Bukele in El Salvador. And I'm sure President Bukele in El Salvador will react to that and say, well, let's prove how we're going to be better now that you're involved in Bitcoin. And my question to everyone else is, where's the Dennis Porter in China? Where's the Dennis Porter in UK? Where is all the different Dennis Porters all around the world? Because here's the reality. We can change the world with this game theory by everybody engaging in the area that is most suited to you. So if you want to advocate for building on layer 1 and layer 2 and ordinals and runes, then that's one area. If you're a Bitcoin miner and you need transaction fees into the future, then you want this innovation around there. If we want to make sure that this is happening in the best sources of energy around the world, this is a perfect opportunity for some of the innovation that may be happening across some of the nations in Africa and South America, Central America, and all around the world. So all of you need to step up, I think, your efforts. And Dennis Porter's leading the way, and he's saying, I want America to be the greatest country for Bitcoin. There is a movement now, and everybody should say, well, we want our country to be better. And everyone advocate for even your own self-custody, and maybe you work at the individual level. But we just have to get used to it, that when you create a free market, it means anyone can participate in that free market, whether it be left, whether it be right, whether it be individuals, whether it be corporate companies, whether it be banks, whether it be central bank digital currencies that want to back their Bitcoin, back their currencies by Bitcoin, or whether it be politicians that want to use the Bitcoin lobby in order to achieve their goals. And so I think it's just a sign of how far we've come as an industry. And I just want to leave it there with Dennis. If anyone wants to engage and be a part of some of the work that you're working on, how can they contact you and how can they be involved?
Absolutely. Great to be on. I couldn't agree with you more that, if you want to see your country go towards the way of Bitcoin and be a Bitcoin country, you have to get involved. No one's going to do it for you. And on the note of creating Dennis Porters in other parts of the world, you should absolutely reach out to us if you're interested in that, particularly if you're interested in funding that type of operation. We at Satoshi Action are looking into how we can lean into helping our international partners. We're already having great conversations with some very, very big folks. So I would certainly reach out if that's an interest of yours, because we are going to be pushing into international markets, likely within the next 6 to 12 months. If those international partners who are very, very, very big partners are interested in coming in, I think they are. And I think that we will be able to move to the international markets where I see there's so much opportunity to move fast, because the United States is a big country. The Senate is one of the most deliberative bodies on the planet, which means slow. So if you want to move quickly, there's lots of opportunities. El Salvador is moving fast. Other countries can move fast too as well. Please reach out to us if you're interested in that. If you're interested in that or helping in the United States, you can reach out to me at dennis@satoshiaction.io. Also on Twitter, it's at Dennis_Porter_. And I look at all my DMs, even though some of them go to that little side inbox. I look at every single one of my DMs. So if I see a good one come through, I'm certainly going to be responding. Simon, thank you again for having me on the show. And if you're in Nashville this week, please come say hi to me. I will be all around the conference and looking forward to meeting people in person.
Okay, well, let's see. Donald Trump, Bitcoin reserve asset, restore my faith in the United States. Everyone get in touch with Dennis if you want to be involved in politics in your country. Let's get as much adoption for Bitcoin and usher in that wave of peace and innovation in free markets. So thanks for joining us. And I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Bitcoin Hard Talk Interviews. Please let me know what you would like to see and who you'd like me to interview in the future in the comment section below. And why don't you tag myself and anyone else that you'd like us to interview on X, and we'll see if we can make that happen. Thanks a lot.